What's happening, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be making a hallway table someone commissioned me to build out of old pallets and scrap 2x4s that I've picked up along the way. I start by running all the planks down the table saw using my straightening jig, trying to take off the arch of the board. Once I get every board run down, I remove the straightening jig, and then I move my fence in just enough to cut off the other side of the plank. And this usually gives me a pretty straight edge to work with. It takes a little time to do this, but in the end it's more level and you don't have to do as much sanding trying to get it right. It makes it a lot easier gluing them up too when they're all pretty much the same height. So now I'm just laying them all out on a table and put some clamps on, because there's several ways you can do this. You can do it by colors, or you can mix up the colors and then just lay them out and glue them. So I got the first half of the table starting to glue it up now. And I decided to put wax paper down on my table just to keep it from sticking and making a mess. But I found out real quickly that wax paper on something this big trying to glue it up is not a good idea. It kept getting stuck in the cracks, and it made a big mess. So I finally just turned to my corn sacks. They usually work pretty good also as table covers, and you know, they don't cost a whole lot, so you can throw them away if you ruin one of them. So now I moved over to the Beaver planer. This is the 13-inch planer. I've had it probably about a year. I've never had any problem with it. I have a review video coming soon, but this thing is great. So I just run the pieces through the planer until I get them pretty much uniform the same. So now I decide to go back in with a piece of wood just to go into the middle, because I have never used Purple Heart before. So I've kind of been wanting to do something with Purple Heart, and the people that asked for this table said they didn't care, just use my imagination, do what I wanted to. So I kind of have free reign on that. So I'm going to put Purple Heart down the center of the table just to give it a little bit different look than something you can normally see or buy at a store. So I glue my center board in to one side at a time. I was kind of afraid I would get a lot of shift if I tried to do both sides. So I just glue one side first and I let it dry. Then I go back and I glue the other side and just put as many clamps on it as I possibly could that I thought was enough. And I've never had problems doing this before either, so we'll see how it turns out. So while I'm waiting on all that glue to dry, I go back to the table saw with my scrap 2x4 pieces, and I just start running them down. I decided I wanted the frame of the table to be 3-inch wide, so instead of just using a regular old 2x4, I cut the rounded edges from the factory off of the 2x4s using the table saw, just so I have a more square look appearance. And then the parts that will be the bottom shelf, I ripped them down to 2x2. So when I got that done, I went over to the miter saw and I cut those. So now moving on, I get my pile of these and I just take them over to the table and start sanding on them. A lot of these have been outside before, they look weathered, so I'm trying to sand them down to where they pretty much look the same color. I didn't want to start on the staining process and then several turn out darker than the others, so I just tried to sand it down. Using my Kreg jig K4, I start drilling all my pocket holes in the bottom rungs that will be the shelves. And I get those done and I just move on to the legs and the frame part of the table while I've got plenty of time waiting on the glue to dry. So on the bottom shelf pieces, I just drill one hole in each end, and then the top pieces, I drill 2 in each end, and then the runners that go from left to right, I drill 1 on each side of the inside and the bottom side. The bottom side won't be seen, but the 4 that are on the inside, I just put pocket hole plugs in them just in case. So now I've moved over to assembly, and I just use a clamp and clamp the pieces together and start running in my pocket screws. And note to self, is a little bit of a short distance in between the legs, so I had to take out the long extension in some cases, and there's also other places I had to end up using a hand driver to run the screws in. I guess I need to invest in a swivel to go on the end, but at this time I didn't have one available. So moving on with the runners, I lay those in, and you can better see there where I have the two on the side pointing downward, and then there's also two pointing inward, so you won't be able to see those, because this right here is the top of the table. I just make sure everything's good and square before I start running screws, but I use wood glue wherever necessary, and plus pocket hole screws. So now just continuing on, moving around and putting in the bottom sides that'll hold the shelving. I just use a long bar clamp to hold all the legs in together, square and straight, and it keeps your piece steady while you're trying to run screws. So it's really starting to shape up now, getting to the end of assembly here. And when you know it, the customer comes in with a design change. They decided that they would like to have the farmhouse look. So I just go back to the 2x2 pile and cut a couple notches in and get them in and just make them some X's. So now I'm moving over to the other fun part of sanding some more. I know everybody loves the sanding. It can be relaxing, but sometimes it's just hurry up and get it over with. So now I am starting to put in the shelving or the rungs on the bottom. And I cut two spacers at 1 5/8 inches. That's about what it's going to take to go across. Using a clamp, I just hold my pieces in place long enough for me to run the pocket holes in. It just, having an extra set of hands is pretty nice. So now using some English chestnut by Minwax, I just take an old piece of a rag and I just start moving along the bottom first and just, staining everything I can stain and letting it soak in pretty good. I had earlier off camera used a pre-stain also just to help with the drying process and the sealing process. But I just take my time moving around with the stain and make sure I get every piece covered. So once the staining is complete, I'll let it dry about 24 hours before moving forward with the hardware that's going to hold on my tabletop. For this build, I decided to go with figure 8s that I purchased on Amazon, and I can drop a link below in the description. So moving around with the slide rule, I just measure in about 1/2 inch and place my mark. Then I take a 3/4 inch Forstner bit and I go around and I drill down about 1/8 of an inch. Some of the holes were a little tight, so I just used a nut driver with a hammer and just kind of knocked some of them in. It wasn't all of them, it was a few, but I just evenly spaced them. I think in all I used 8 total. So now with the glue dry on the top and all the sanding done, I go in with clear epoxy and I just start filling in some of the gaps that are in the board. It glued up pretty good, but some places there's just gaps where the wood didn't exactly fit together. So I just go back in with clear epoxy and start filling those holes. And then I go ahead while I'm here and just pour my seal coat and just smear it and spread it the best I can all the way around without making a mess. I don't really want it to run over the edges yet. I'll go back and do that by hand before applying the final flood coat. So once all the epoxy dries and cures, I just flip the tabletop over and set the frame up on the back side of it, and then drill a few pilot holes for the figure 8s and run in the screws. And that's it. It's all completed and ready to go to its home. Easy money. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please remember to like and subscribe on the way out. Drop me a comment in the links below, and I'll see you on the next one.